Imagine you are on the bridge of a ship, and on your monitor, your AIS monitor, it says that there's another ship nearby, but when you look around, that's not the case. How is that possible? And what are the ramifications of that? That's the subject of today's deep dive of Threat Talks. My name is Lieuwe Jan Koning, and from the Damen Shipyards headquarters simulator training room, we bring you Threat Talks, a deep dive. The subject of today is AIS. Let's get on to it.
Welcome to Threat Talks. Let's delve deep into the dynamic world of cybersecurity.
Let me briefly introduce my two guests of today. It's Rob Maas. He is the field CTO of Ontoit. His job is to come up with cybersecurity solutions. And on my other side, it's Jeroen Scheerder. He is a cybersecurity specialist in almost everything, I have to say. Gentlemen, welcome. So AIS, what is it? Rob, can you explain?
AIS is a simple system, very simple even, that is on ships that send out their information, where they are, so the position, which ships they are, the speed, but also their location. So that's what it does in basic. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a little bit similar to what I know of Flight Radar 24 or so. So where you see all the planes. Is that comparable?
It's comparable. So on planes that's called ADBS. But the big difference here is that ADBS is a mandatory protocol. So every plane must send out its information. While AIS is mandatory for some ships, but not for all.
Okay, but it's probably something that captains, anyone in the maritime sector actually relies on.
Yeah, it's almost every ship is using it. There are some exceptions. We'll come to that. But indeed, if you're on open water, you can imagine in the middle of the ocean, then there is not much on the horizon that you can see. You can see a lot of horizon, but no indicators where you are, for example. And to check if there are other ships around or that you are in the direction of another ship, you can use AIS, which just broadcasts out all the information of all the ships. So you know what other ships are nearby and if you need to alter the course a bit.
Jeroen, can you explain a little bit what the significance of the system is for the industry?
Yes. So you have basically two needs that you need to meet in such an identification system. One of them is letting other ships know that you're there and where you're going. And the other thing is listening to the signals from other ships nearby as to their position, direction and speed. This is especially important if you consider very large vessels, which are very slowly reactive systems, they call them physics. So humans are not really equipped to make course corrections. Mm-hmm. So you need to plot a different course very long ahead if you need to change it. So you need to adapt to a wider scene in the environment than you can do just by eyeballing it and pushing some levers.
Okay, so and so what if it it malfunctions? What could be the ramifications?
So malfunctions you have in many ways. If you do not announce your position, of course, other ships might run into you. If other ships don't announce their position, you might run into them. But if someone just announces an arbitrary position for some or other ship at a location where that ship is not, or someone starts sending out distress signals, men overboard, for example, at a location that is in your course, then of course you need to modify your course even though there's nothing there. And this can be used to manipulate your course, of course, used by pirates. And this way of deceiving the system can also be used to hide your whereabouts, which is of course useful if your intention is to do embargo evasion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's lots of ways we really need a reliable system.
There are many ways to deceive the system, and we would like it to be somewhat more reliable sometimes.
Okay. Yeah, I also read about an event in the Russian-Ukrainian war where somewhere near the fleet of Russia there was suddenly UK ships seen, right? And they were not really there. Is this because of this system that
Yes.
got spoofed?
Yeah, this is called spoofing. So that's impersonating another ship, for example. Or if I say I'm Lieuwe Jan and there's no extra check, then I'm spoofing this podcast and I will become the host. So that's spoofing, and that's also done now in the war with Russia and Ukraine.
Is that an offer? Because it's a bit. I'm a bit. Yeah, uncomfortable because I don't know where we're going, right? I'm not the best of captains. I'm afraid. Yeah.
No, but the fun in AIS that we can drop you anywhere on the planet.
Okay, so I understand how crucial it is. So, but you said it's mandatory for some.
Yeah, so it's mandatory for passenger ships and cargo ships, but for example, not for all fishing ships. That's depending on the geolocation and the politics there. Then also for recreational ships or yachts, it's also optional. So of course it's wise to do, but some people want to hide their location, maybe millionaires, VIPs.
Yeah, so billionaires really have big yachts and they are exempted.
Yeah. And the reason we have this, of course, is for ships that do not navigate quickly, are not very agile in that, and those billionaire yachts probably are, since they are so big.
So it is basic maritime safety.
Yeah.
But this class of ships is excluded.
Okay.
And then maybe you can compare this if you come back to the flight radar. Also, the people with a private jet also are mandatory to send out ADBS, but the flight radar, for example, is not allowed to send out that signal. So the information is there, so all the ground control knows that the planes are there, but it is not displayed as public information. But with AIS, there's no such thing as mandatory requirement to have the equipment. So there could be even no AIS signal at all. So if things go sideways, there's nobody that can pick up a signal because there is nothing.
Okay, clear. So can you speak a little bit on the different kind of ways to spoof, attack, or whatever, to meddle with this system?
Yeah, so the easiest thing is it's a radio signal. So if I have a very cheap transmitter, I can just send out a packet that I'm not in Rotterdam, like here, but I'm in New York, like I said. That's the easiest attack. The other thing is then I can also pretend that I'm another ship. So the identification parameters I can change within the packet and say, okay, but I'm not on this tug, but maybe maybe I'm in a yacht. So that's something you can change. You can change your speed, so you can alter the complete content of the packet, of the data, and then mislead people who you are and what you're doing.
Just broadcast anything you like.
You can just broadcast it. I can also say I'm now a man overboard, and then other ships need to react to that. So there's a lot of ways I can interfere with it. And also because this is just a broadcast and an open protocol, I can also jam the whole frequency and send out, for example, a lot of information. It's like a DOS attack, because then I don't know what packets to trust anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jeroen, it sounds like a protocol. You wrote books on protocols and how to secure them and all that. Huh? So you know a thing or two about this. What's your opinion on this? I mean, I hear no encryption, no signature, no nothing. Is it one of the protocols that you wrote about from like FTP or so from the 19 earlies?
Well, the similarity, of course, is that there's an implicit assumption that there's a shared medium that is in some sense trustworthy. And that is in all our interest to just forward information to one another and rely on that implicitly. Such a design, of course, also pretty much entails that we need to have a validating step where we need additional reliability requirements. So, in case of such a positioning system, a beaconing system, we would need a stronger sense of identity, for example, and validation on things like position and direction and velocity. So the basic CIA constraints apply there. Similar measures are conceivable that we use in other contexts in which we have communications that we think should be confidential, intact, and reliable, as in authentic. But of course, this is an established protocol And security cannot just be bolted on that way. However, we can, of course, using additional information outside of the design of the protocol to detect classes of abuses by detecting anomalies.
Is it something that could be done, or is it already happening, to your knowledge?
It's being done, and it has historic precursors. So if we just enter the time machine for a while, there were these German U-boats that were targeting cargo vessels, mainly between the US and Great Britain. So the British had a need to determine position of U-boats. U-boats every once in a while surfaced to receive commands. This communication was encrypted, so there was nothing the British could do with it in the early stages of the war anyway. But it was communication. So the Brits designed a high-frequency direction finder, HUF-DUF system, to do a triangulation on the radio signals, and then could pinpoint the relatively exact position of the U-boats and send Catalinas there. Mm-hmm. So, and pretty much the same approach is now carried over to the AIS system.
Yeah, because AIS wasn't there in the Second World War, right?
It wasn't. It's pretty new. It's insanely new for a protocol with such a poor security design. So it's been introduced in 1997, I believe. Yeah. And there were people who had some sense of communication security back then. Actually, there were people with a sense of communication security.
I know for a fact that you didn't like FTP in 1997.
No, I think it should have been taken behind the barn and get a mercy shot in the back of the head in 1972 or something like that. But that's a very different age, of course. However, different age. Caesar already knew, of course, that it was important not to give away intelligence to your enemies. We could have learned, I think.
Yeah. But you now have this protocol.
Yes.
And this triangulation technique, is that then now actively used already? Are people experimenting with it?
It is used to detect anomalies, and it's done by this assumes that you can triangulate. So a triangulation, it requires two systems and some knowledge of geography. In the case of, for example, if a boat is in a channel, then you just need 2 points. But in a general case, you need 3 points, and these 3 points need to know their own position. And then they can, by time difference analysis, they can establish the position of a vessel sending a message. And so also conclude that this message is sending out a different position than where it's actually at.
But can you, so I'm on a huge ship, and I'm afraid for the pirates that Rob mentioned. I mean, I don't have 3 different locations that I can use to triangulate, right? So there needs to be a different system.
No, so you need cooperation from ground stations nearby.
That's a good point, because the universal AIS system only transmits for about 75 kilometers, so for 40 miles more or less. So if you're really in the middle of the ocean, then the ground stations are not nearby.
No, then you depend on satellite communication, and the satellite coverage across the globe is somewhat spotty. You might not have 3 satellites within reach. You might not even have 1 if you're in a sort of black spot on the ocean.
Another thing to add to that is a very simple method to detect spoofing is if I send out a message here that I'm in New York, and you pick it up and you look at your coordinates, then you think, okay, but New York is far more than 75 kilometers. Then you can simply filter on that message and then drop it.
Yeah, but that's not what pirates do. I mean, they may try to alter your course.
They try to
make you.
Yeah.
We're gonna not ram into that ship. No, okay, yeah.
Yeah, this is called a near miss.
A near miss. Okay, good. Yeah,
that's good.
So. We started digging into this technology for the one conference where we looked at the maritime sector. How can you hack a boat? How you what kind of angles are there? This is clearly one. I mean, if it's not hard to do something about. I mean, if you're a shipbuilder, you're not going to change on your own this whole system. But it didn't make the final presentation. Why?
Yeah. So like you said, we mentioned it in the presentation, during the presentation, but we did not do a demo because it was too simple. It is already being done too many times. For everyone in the industry, at least, it would not cause a shock. They really know this.
In the cyber industry, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, and in the maritime, I think as well. If you're familiar with the AIS, you know the simplicity of it, and therefore probably also know the weaknesses of it.
Okay. So there's a call to action here. We need to fix this. Then.
I think that's a good question. I think we certainly need to take a look at it. But as you also mentioned, it is a very simple established protocol. So it's really hard to build on security in the protocol afterwards. So it's really, I compare it often with email. We started with email, sending out message, plain text, no authentication on the receivers. And then we started adding all kinds of security measures, but in the essence, in the basics, the email protocol is still the same. But now we can encrypt messages, but that's hard to do with key exchange. But it is a possibility. We can check if the sender is reliable with DKIM, DMARC. We have all kinds of added-on protocols, but it's all kind of boiled on. And it's really hard to change an existing protocol and integrate security in it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the simplest way would be to add a second step to the broadcast of a system in which you, as a responder, get to challenge it, and then the initiator would have to respond to the challenge. Then you could add an additional a security layer that has confidentiality and integrity. But there's a but. The really hard part, I think, is having the authenticity constraint met, because that either goes through a centralized system in which an authority vouches for your identity somehow in a cryptographic chain, or you need a delegated system. And there is a balance of power in there, in the sense that if you have a centralized system, of course, there is a party that effectively controls the identity of ships and can disrupt or just negate the existence of an adversary's fleet. And in a distributed system, which is conceivable, but it has a bootstrap issue in adding systems to an existing web of trust. So
I can't help thinking about DNS or DNSSEC or similar challenges.
Yes, but DNS in the end is centralized, and that's also controversial because there's actually a specific agency in the world that controls DNS, and the rumblings about this in China and the VS are not negligible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the maritime sector is really international. I mean, there's not one governing.
No, it's maybe even more international than the internet.
No, it's very international. You have Dutch boats which are registered in Greece, and they have Indian crews. So this,
So it's really hard to come together and figure out a good system that everybody then trusts.
And even then, if you can create a system, there's another challenge to add on to that. If sometimes you don't want to rely on such systems, it just needs to be fast. So adding complexity to other systems will, of course, delay the acceptance of a channel of a message.
Yeah, especially if it's manual.
Yeah, and then if I, for example, overboard, so the man overboard protocol, then I don't want all those systems in place. I just want to get picked up out of the water. So adding all these security also probably will add complexity and cost time. And
some we have, of course, we have examples, but no widely implemented examples. And the one example that springs to my mind is DNS Curve. Which is ad hoc, an uncentralized step up with full confidentiality in a distributed way. And it's low overhead in a sense. Still overhead, of course.
But that's a great starting point, probably. Well, what I hear you say, gentlemen, we need a form of encryption. The identity of the sender needs to be there, and it needs to be backward compatible. Right? Because
yes.
It's a lot of work, probably.
Because in the end, if you get a man overboard signal that is not identified and unencrypted, there still might be a man overboard.
Yeah. Okay. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for these insights, and a good call to action to those who create the next version of AIS. And let's hope we'll have a better system, more reliable system in the future. Thank you. This was the end of Threat Talks. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you like what you see and you want to see the next one also in next week on Tuesday, make sure you subscribe to our channel. Then you will get a notification of your app. And please like us, because if you do, it allows us to spread the word further, and we'd love to do that. Thank you very much, and see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Threat Talks, a podcast by Onto It Cybersecurity and AMS-IX. Did you like what you heard? Do you want to learn more? Follow Threat Talks to stay up to date on the topic of cybersecurity.